There we go. Now it works. Okay, we're here with Deborah Seligman. You can just look at me during the talk. So you say the climate, in your words, is hostile towards the oil and natural gas industry here in New Mexico. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that?
Well, I believe when I said hostile, it's not everybody. I think that there are definitely people that we do business with that would prefer that oil and gas not be in the state. I think that we have a misconception that you can do away with oil and gas, and you can't. You know, New Mexico is rich in natural resources. It's rich in wind. It's rich in sun. It's rich in oil. It's rich in gas. It's rich in uranium, coal. And I think that people forget that it's never going to be one or the other. It's going to take all sources of energy in order to move forward and meet the demands, particularly over the next 30 years. But we can't do that if we're not allowed to drill.
And right now you feel you're not allowed to drill?
We are allowed to drill. And when I say but, all new areas have been closed to us. You know, they don't want drilling, and Santa Fe County isn't even a new area. I mean, we drilled in this county 80 years ago. We can't drill on Otero Mesa. You know, you move into various areas around the states where there could be new finds, and it's closed to us. We're not allowed in. When you move in to get a drilling permit that may be in some type of unconventional area, it's hard to get a permit. You know, there's too much you have to do that really doesn't assure environmental quality. It's almost, harassment is maybe a strong term, but it's almost a harassment value. You know, you can't go in and get a drilling permit without yada, 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 but that does not necessarily protect the environment.
What are the problems that you have with the pit rule as it's currently written?
I think, you know, the pit rule is currently in the courts, so there's a lot of things that we don't touch on. But one of the things that I do think is there is that we have gone from a 2-page document to anywhere from a 10 to 12-page document in order to even get a permit to drill. With the pit rule, I think that a tremendous amount of it is that the requirements within a pit rule, there again, and I'm going to say it does not necessarily protect the environment. And when a company is going to have to pay $250,000 to move their drill cuttings to a landfill that probably is going to be messed in with a whole bunch of other stuff, you have much more of an environmental hazard sitting right in the middle of that landfill. And I think that if industry were allowed to do the business that they know how to do best, and all of our member companies follow very stringent best management practices, that if we were allowed to do our business, we would be doing more drilling within the state.
But you know exactly what the people on the opposite side are going to say. Sure. Say that if you let the businesses basically self-police, then we'll have something like the Gulf spill with BP.
Well, and I'm not saying self-police. I'm not saying no regulations. I'm just saying that if you're going to put regulations in place, they have to make sense. And having 12 pages of paperwork in order to have one well and have to follow all these things that have absolutely nothing to do with the environment is crazy. You know, it does not make good sense. Also, I think that you can find that most of the regulating community that regulates oil and gas has absolutely no experience. You know, that's not their field of expertise. With the pit rule, if you look at the 3103 or the 3103 standards that were applied, now those were standards that were adopted by the Water Quality Control Commission. But in the interpretation of those standards, if you look at the Oil Conservation Division rule for pits, they're reinterpreted. So that we're having to fulfill a standard that essentially we're held to stricter standards than any other industry in the state of New Mexico. That includes mining, you know, that includes dairies, that includes any industry at all that has some type of imprint on the environment.
What would you say to a taxpayer who'll take a look at this story and say, all right, so the oil and gas people, they're complaining about the conservationists. The conservationists are complaining about the oil and natural gas people. What does it mean to me, the average person, the average taxpayer in New Mexico?
Well, number one, I'm going to correct you. We're not complaining.
Okay. Right.
I don't know how else to say that, but we're not complaining.
But there's charges going back and forth.
Yeah. And but you have to look who's making those charges, you know. But anyway, what would I say to the average taxpayer? I looked at a report from 2005, and I think if you do talk to Senator Smith, he'll reiterate it, and I think he's got better figures than I do. And in essence, what it means to the average taxpayer, and this is from a 2005 study, if oil and gas were not in the state of New Mexico, every individual's taxes would go up $2,000 a year, period. That's what it means to the taxpayers of the state of New Mexico.
But even if, I don't think anyone would, even someone hard from the left would say we want to get rid of oil and natural gas industry in New Mexico. But what would you say to those people that are saying, well, all we're doing is we're asking the oil and gas industry to clean up whatever mess they make that comes from getting a resource out of the ground?
I think that we've always done that. You know, and we've been doing it for 80 years within New Mexico. We're cleaning up our messes. We're also following what I call the flavor of the day. You know, we have a pit rule that says do yada, yada, yada. And then as technology changes, we recognize that we could be doing something different here. And so rules change in order to do that. And I think that as technology changes and as we grow, whether we're regulators or industry, we recognize different needs. And so those needs are fulfilled. But I will not say that industry has ever not cleaned up their messes. You know, those poor little old pits from 80 years ago, we didn't know that to store oil and all the residual from an oil field was going to have the impact that it had. We know that today. We knew that maybe 20 years after we did it. Mm-hmm. But it was not, because New Mexico is one of the founding states for the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. So this was prior to people even trying to put regulations on us. Industry moved forward with the various states around the union to say we need to police ourselves and we need to set standards to follow, and we still do that.
Okay, I heard from Brian Egolf, someone who's in the pro-conservation camp, so to speak. He says, after I showed him what Bill Scherer told me, he said, production follows opportunity, which is made or broken by the price of the commodity. It is the fall in prices, not the pit rule and regulations like that have affected production.
Oh, I agree with him, and I think I just said that. You know, in 2009, nobody did well. And it does follow the price of the commodity. But what happens to this state when we move into a better price for the commodity and we're not growing? You know, then you notice the impact of overregulation or an unstable regulatory arena.
Tell me a little bit more about the unstable regulatory arena that you mentioned to me about Colorado.
All right. I have a producer or a producing company. There is a producing company in the state of New Mexico that essentially is not produced in the state for over 2 years. And when I inquired, because they're a major producer, I mean they're a big producer, and when I inquired on their lack of activity in New Mexico, yet they're drilling across the border in San Juan Basin, Colorado. And I said, you know, it's the same reserve, you know, it's the same field, it's the same basin. What is the difference? And the difference is even though Colorado supposedly has stricter rules than the state of New Mexico, he said when you move forward for a drilling permit in the state of Colorado, they say do X, Y, and Z. And you do X, Y, and Z, and you get your drilling permit. In the state of New Mexico, you have X, Y, and Z that you have to follow. But all of a sudden, when you apply for your drilling permit, maybe X is asked to be a Y, maybe Z is asked to be a B, and now you've got a C thrown in there for the front of it. So you can't just, you don't just have rules that you follow. You have rules, you have a moving target. And that's part of what's wrong with the regulatory arena in the state of New Mexico at this time.
Deborah, that's all the questions I've got. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Deborah Seligman, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Do you have